The first scream was swallowed by the velvet drapes. Inside the grand townhouse overlooking a fog-drowned London square, music still drifted through gilded rooms, laughter rippling over crystal glasses and polished marble floors. The gathering was the sort of affair that made the city's elite feel immortal silk gowns, tuxedos, diamonds flashing like captive stars. No one noticed when the scream came again, sharper this time, cut short with the abruptness of a snuffed candle. It was a maid who found her. The hostess lay on the Persian rug of her private sitting room, one gloved hand stretched toward an overturned side table. A half-filled teacup had spilled, its dark contents spreading like a shadow. Her eyes were open, fixed on the chandelier above, expression frozen between surprise and terror. There were no signs of struggle, no weapon, no broken furniture, just a faint scent in the air, bitter almonds, almost hidden beneath perfume and cigar smoke. The guests arrived in a flurry of gasps and whispered horror. The doors had been locked from the inside. The windows were latched. No one had seen anyone enter or leave, and yet the woman was dead. Within minutes, the house was swarming with police. Officers cordoned off the room while detectives prowled, notebooks ready, magnifying glasses poised. They confirmed what the guests already knew: no one had touched the body, no one had disturbed the room since the discovery. It was as if death had stepped in unseen and departed without leaving footprints. Then came the second shock. The famous diamond was gone. It had been the centerpiece of the evening, displayed earlier in a glass case under watchful eyes, a legendary gem, blue as midnight and rumored to carry both fortune and tragedy. The hostess had worn it at dinner, a glittering point of fascination. Later, she had retired to her sitting room, saying she wished to rest before dessert. She had taken the diamond with her. Now, it was nowhere to be found. The glass case downstairs remained locked. No scratches, no forced entry. The safe in her dressing room showed no sign of tampering, and the doors of the sitting room had been locked from within. The windows were closed. No secret passages were found, no hidden compartments discovered. The diamond had simply vanished from a sealed room. The officers questioned the guests: a jealous rival, a disgruntled relative, a charming fortune hunter. Each suspect had opportunity at some point during the evening, yet none could explain how they could have entered a locked room without being seen. Servants were questioned next. They had passed the corridor, they said, but no one entered or left after the hostess retired. The doctor concluded the cause of death was poison, delivered quietly, cleanly, without a struggle. But how had it been administered? The tea? The sweets? The perfume on her gloves? Every possibility created new questions. Whoever had done this had planned with extraordinary care, had relied on an impossible stroke of luck. Hours passed. The guests remained trapped in the house, nerves fraying, whispers curling through the corridors like smoke. A detective muttered that it was the kind of crime that made a mockery of logic. Another declared it unsolvable. Locked room, missing diamond, poisoned victim. No trace of intrusion, no clear motive, no clear suspect. Just before dawn, a small, precise gentleman arrived, brushing fog from his coat with delicate distaste. His eyes, sharp as polished steel, took in the chaos with polite detachment. He greeted the officers, nodded at the silent crowd, and stepped into the death room. He did not rush. He observed the faint scent of almonds, the untouched window latches, the position of the teacup, the fallen glove, the empty space on the hostess's throat where the diamond necklace had rested, and finally, a single detail so small that everyone else had overlooked it, a curious speck of blue shimmer caught in the fringe of the rug. He smiled, almost imperceptibly. The crime, it seemed, was far from unsolvable. The small gentleman moved about the room with the careful reverence of a priest inspecting a sacred altar. Policemen stepped aside instinctively, sensing that his quiet manner concealed an authority sharper than any shouted command. He asked no questions at first. He simply looked. The body, the teacup, the glove, the door lock, the windows, the rug. He crouched beside the fallen glove and lifted it delicately between thumb and forefinger. The silk was expensive, ivory white, faintly scented with rosewater. Yet near the wrist seam, a faint stain marked the fabric, barely visible, the color of dried tea. He sniffed it once, then nodded to himself. "Madam poured her tea herself?" he asked softly. A police inspector straightened. "So we believe. The maid set the tray earlier. No one else entered. And the cup was found already overturned. Yes, the gentleman set the glove back exactly where he had found it and turned his attention to the teapot. He removed the lid. The leaves inside were ordinary. He sniffed again. Nothing remarkable. Then he reached for the sugar bowl, lifted one cube with the tips of his fingers, and studied it. It looked perfectly normal. Yet he did not put it back. He slid the cube into a handkerchief. The inspector frowned. "You think the poison was in the sugar?" The gentleman's eyes twinkled. "I think, my friend, that poison must travel somehow. If not by cup, then by cube. If not by drink, then by something else. One must follow the route, yes." The inspector sighed. "But how could anyone place poison in her tea without entering the room? The door was locked from the inside." The gentleman murmured. "Locked rooms are always so proud of themselves. They boast of impossibility. Yet impossibility is only a word used by people who have not looked carefully enough." He rose and examined the door. The lock was solid, the key still in the inside slot. He tested it once, gently. No trick, no double mechanism, nothing suspicious. Then he turned to the windows. Fog pressed against the glass, dull and silver. The latches were secure. No tampering, no gap. He sighed softly, almost disappointed. "Then how did the murderer enter?" the inspector asked. The gentleman smiled. "You assume entry was necessary." Before the inspector could respond, a murmur rose from the doorway. A woman in a wine-colored gown stood there, clutching a silk shawl around her shoulders. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed red from shock. I wish to answer more questions," she said, "if you need them." The inspector waved her forward, but the gentleman stepped in first, bowing politely. "Madam, forgive my intrusion. I have only one question for now. Earlier this evening, when our poor hostess retired to this room, did she carry the diamond with her?" The woman nodded.
Yes, she always did. She never removed it except in private.
"And did you see it later?" "No, I did not see her again after dinner." The gentleman tilted his head. "Yet you were concerned enough to come looking for her before the maid found her." "Why?" The woman stiffened. I thought she was taking too long." "Too long," he repeated gently. "And this thought came to you at precisely what time?" The woman hesitated. A flicker of annoyance passed over her features before she masked it again with grief. "I do not remember exactly." The gentleman's eyes softened, kind but penetrating. "Memory is so convenient when it wishes to be." She said nothing, but her fingers tightened on the shawl. After she left, the inspector exhaled impatiently. "Are you suggesting she is involved?" "I suggest nothing yet," the gentleman replied, "but I observe much. And I notice when a person measures their answers like a shopkeeper counting coins." He returned to the rug and studied the tiny blue shimmer again. He plucked a single thread free. Under the light, it gleamed faintly sapphire blue. "Interesting," he murmured. The inspector leaned closer. "A piece of the diamond?" "No, the diamond is far harder, far stronger. This is merely silk, a thread from a garment, but not from the hostess. Her dress was ivory satin." "Then whose?" "That," the gentleman said softly, slipping the thread into his pocket beside the sugar cube, "is precisely the question that will lead us out of this charming little maze." Outside, the fog thickened against the windows, pressing like a silent witness. Inside, the dead woman lay unmoving, the diamond vanished, the murderer unseen. But now, at last, the impossible crime had begun to yield its first secrets. Morning light crept reluctantly into the townhouse, thin and grey through the fogged windows. The guests had spent the night in uneasy limbo, seated in velvet chairs or pacing marble floors, whispering theories that grew wilder with every hour. Now, under the sharp gaze of the police and the small, meticulous detective, they were summoned one by one to speak. The first was a tall gentleman with silver at his temples and the faint scent of expensive tobacco clinging to his coat. He bowed stiffly. "I was with the hostess at dinner," he said. "We spoke of art, of travel. She was in excellent spirits. After dessert, she excused herself. I remained with the others. You may ask anyone. You notice nothing unusual?" The detective asked. "Nothing at all." The detective's eyes drifted to the man's hands. The fingers were stained faintly brown at the tips. "You smoke a pipe?" he asked. "Yes." Yet you did not carry it tonight." The gentleman blinked. "I left it in my room." "Curious," the detective murmured, "for your fingers suggest recent use. Very recent." A moment of silence stretched. The man's jaw tightened, but he said nothing further. He was dismissed, his confident certainty slightly cracked. Next came a young woman, nervous and bright-eyed, twisting a handkerchief between her fingers. "I adored her," she said quickly. "She was always kind to me. I would never harm her." "No one has suggested you did," the detective replied gently. "Tell me simply, did you see anyone near the sitting room after she retired?" "No," the woman said. "But I did hear something." The inspector leaned forward. "What kind of something?" "A door," she whispered. "Not opening, closing, softly. I thought perhaps a servant." The inspector frowned, but the door was locked from the inside. The detective smiled faintly. "Did you see the door?" "No, only heard it." "Then," he said softly, "it may not have been that door at all." The woman looked confused. The detective, however, had already made a mental note. Sounds could be planted as easily as footprints. Another guest entered, broad-shouldered, his manner overly helpful. He almost tripped over himself in eagerness to speak. "I checked the corridor," he announced. "No one there. I even tested the windows earlier in the evening because of the cold. All was secure. Impossible for anyone to climb in or out." "You tested the windows," the detective repeated. "Yes, I dislike drafts." "And did you test the sitting room windows specifically?" The man hesitated. "I do not remember exactly which ones." "Ah," said the detective. "So you remember the act, but not the detail. Interesting." The man flushed, suddenly aware that his helpfulness had turned into exposure. He was dismissed quickly, his eagerness now a red mark against him. One by one they came: a cousin who spoke too calmly about inheritance, a secretary who insisted on perfect timelines that felt rehearsed, a maid who admitted she had entered the room earlier to place the tea tray and then contradicted herself about where she had set the sugar bowl. Each voice offered a thread. Some threads aligned, others knotted. Between interviews, the detective walked the corridor, hands clasped behind his back. He paused outside the sitting room, listening. The house was quiet now, the kind of quiet that lets secrets whisper. The inspector joined him. "None of them could have entered the room," he said. "No one was seen. The lock was intact. The windows were closed. No passageways. The diamond is gone, the woman is dead, and we have nothing solid." The detective tapped a finger lightly against his chin. "On the contrary," he said, "we have too much. A sugar cube that may carry death. A silk thread the color of sapphire. A woman who cannot remember time. A man whose fingers remember tobacco when his words deny it. A sound that may not belong to any door in this house." He looked toward the staircase where the guests waited, anxious and sleepless. "Every liar tells a different story," he murmured, "but the truth tells only one." He turned back toward the sitting room, where the rug still bore the faint impression of tragedy and the empty space where the diamond had once gleamed. Somewhere in that house, the murderer was listening, calculating, believing themselves safe behind the illusion of impossibility. But the illusion was beginning to crack. The detective gathered the fragments of testimony in his mind as though they were pieces of a shattered mirror. Each reflected a different truth, each distorted by fear, ambition, or guilt. Alone in the hostess's sitting room, he stood with his hands folded, studying the empty space at the woman's throat where the diamond had rested. The house around him seemed to breathe uneasily, aware that the net was tightening. He began with the diamond. A gem of such value was never merely decoration. It represented power, inheritance, leverage. It drew admiration and resentment in equal measure. Whoever had taken it had either desired wealth, wished to ruin the hostess, or intended to conceal something far greater than theft. He summoned the cousin first, the one who spoke too calmly. She entered with measured steps, dressed in mourning black that felt premature. Her voice was smooth, her posture composed. "You and the hostess were close?" the detective asked. "Close enough," she replied. "We shared family ties, but we were not intimate." "And the diamond," he said. "Did it concern you?" She smiled thinly. "It was hers, not mine." "Yet if she had died without a will," he said quietly, "you would have inherited a portion of her estate." Her composure faltered for the first time, only slightly, only enough. "But she had a will," the detective continued. one written 3 months ago, leaving nearly everything to her secretary. The cousin's breath caught. That is not true. The detective merely inclined his head. We shall confirm it. But if it is true, then perhaps someone here gained nothing from her death, and someone gained everything. He dismissed her gently. She left with eyes that now held anger rather than grief. Next he called the secretary, who arrived briskly, papers clutched like armor. You kept her schedule, the detective said. Her correspondence. Her personal affairs. Yes. You were aware of her will. The secretary's chin lifted. Yes. And you stand to inherit? I do. Then you possess motive enough to commit murder, he said calmly. The secretary's color drained. I would never harm her. She trusted me. Trust, the detective murmured, is a fine hiding place. He leaned closer, voice soft. Tell me, when you brought her letters this afternoon, did you enter this sitting room? Yes, briefly. And the sugar bowl? I placed it on the tea tray. The detective's eyes glittered. Earlier you told the inspector you did not handle the sugar bowl. The secretary froze. A contradiction, small but lethal. I forgot, they whispered. You forget what suits you, the detective replied kindly. That is not the same as innocence. The secretary was dismissed, shaken. Then came the tall gentleman with the tobacco-stained fingers. He entered with forced dignity. You admired the hostess, the detective said, but you owed her money. The man stiffened. That is irrelevant. Debt, said the detective, is never irrelevant, especially when a diamond disappears. The man's eyes flashed. Are you suggesting I killed her for a jewel? I suggest only that desperation breeds daring. But I never left the dining room after she retired. So you say. Others saw me? Yes, said the detective, but they saw you sitting. They did not see your hands. The man blinked. My hands? The sugar bowl, the detective said softly. A cube missing, a cube that may have carried poison, and fingers that remember smoking a pipe that you swear you did not smoke tonight. The man's composure cracked, just enough to reveal fear beneath arrogance. He too was sent away. The detective continued. The nervous young woman who heard the door. The helpful man who tested windows. The maid who moved the tray. Each carried motives: shadow jealousy of beauty, resentment of rank, terror of dismissal, hunger for wealth. By midday, the house felt like a chessboard mid-game. Pieces had moved. Alliances were hinted. Every suspect could kill. Every suspect could steal. Yet no single story explained the locked door, the missing diamond, the poison, and the absence of intruder. The inspector rubbed his temples. Too many motives, too many possibilities. Precisely, said the detective. When a crime appears impossibly complex, the truth is usually simple but hidden beneath layers of false simplicity. He walked once more to the window, pressing his fingertip against the cold latch. Then he looked down at the rug where the blue silk thread had been found. Someone here needed the diamond, he said. Someone here needed the hostess silenced. Someone here needed the door to remain locked from within. And someone here believes themselves untouchable. He turned toward the staircase where the suspects waited, hearts fluttering like trapped birds. The maze of motive is nearly mapped, he murmured. Now we find the path through it. And somewhere in the house, a guilty mind began to realize that the walls were closing in. By late afternoon, the first glimmers of certainty seemed to settle over the investigation. A tray of tea had been discovered tucked behind a sideboard in the kitchen, the sugar cube carefully removed, now tested and confirmed to carry traces of cyanide. The authorities, eager for resolution, seized upon the discovery as proof. The secretary, whose alibi had seemed shaky and whose hands had contradicted earlier statements, was immediately taken into custody. Case closed, the inspector declared triumphantly, a sense of relief washing over him. Motive, means, and opportunity all aligned. The diamond thief and the poisoner are one and the same. Thank you, gentlemen. He patted the detective on the shoulder as if the hard work were done. The small man smiled politely, inclining his head in formal agreement, but his eyes betrayed a different sentiment. Something did not sit right. He lingered by the sitting room, studying the rug, the placement of the furniture, the slight misalignment of the tea tray when compared to the original layout noted in his mental map of the evening. The silk thread, blue and shining faintly, rested in his coat pocket, a stubborn little puzzle that refused to fit the current solution. He reviewed the testimonies in his mind: the cousin's controlled anger, the maid's contradictory words, the young woman's vague sounds, the tall gentleman's fear beneath a facade of confidence. The secretary might have handled the sugar, but that did not explain how the door had been locked from the inside, or how the diamond had vanished without a trace. Something more was at play, something invisible to the rush of celebration. Walking to the window, he noticed the fog beginning to lift, revealing a grey city beyond. Light reflected off the polished marble floor and the brass fixtures, bouncing off the glinting cut of the chandelier. And yet, the glitter of certainty that filled the inspector's mind felt hollow, too convenient, too neat, too ready to close a case that was far from resolved. He crouched beside the rug again, fingertips brushing the edge of the silk thread. The color was so precise, so deliberate it could belong to no ordinary garment. Whoever had left it had done so intentionally or carelessly, as if to bait those who looked too quickly for the obvious. And here, he realized, the authorities had already taken the bait. A shadow moved behind him. One of the guests, lingering near the hallway, gave a slight start, catching his attention. The guest's eyes were unusually steady, but there was a faint twitch in the jaw, a tension in the hands that seemed rehearsed yet brittle. He recalled how this person had spoken, how their answers had aligned too perfectly with the narrative the inspector now believed. Too eager to be cleared, too willing to point elsewhere. The real criminal, he thought, did not celebrate so openly. They waited, silent and calculating, letting the rush to judgment do their work for them. The secretary in the custody of the police would sweat under interrogation, perhaps break, yet the diamond remained missing. The room had been sealed. The victim was dead. Something about the way the sugar cube had been handled, the timing of events, and the placement of witnesses still defied a neat resolution. The detective walked slowly around the room once more, noting tiny details overlooked in the initial examination: the precise tilt of a chair, the faint indentation on the rug, where a foot might have rested for mere seconds, the whisper of a smell that seemed almost artificial, as if it had been used to mislead. The inspector, noticing the detective's contemplative stance, asked, "Are you certain it isn't over? The evidence is clear, is it not?" The small man shook his head, soft but firm. "Clear to those who wish for certainty," he said, "but clarity is often a mask. The case is not solved. It has only begun to reveal its shape. The true culprit watches from shadows, amused by the parade of suspicion, and they will wait until the world believes the matter closed." Outside, the fog continued to lift, yet inside the townhouse, a heavier fog lingered, one of deception, of misdirection, and of a silent predator still at large. The inspector, confident and exhausted, left the detective alone with the room. Alone, yes, but never without the sense that the solution was near, hidden behind the careful layering of lies and truths, waiting for the patient eye to see the pattern that everyone else had missed. The small man knelt one last time, brushing his fingers along the edge of the rug and the thread in his pocket. A faint smile played at his lips. "Ah, yes," he whispered, "the game has only begun, and yet it has already told me where to look next." Somewhere in the house unseen, someone listened, and somewhere in London a diamond waited for its moment, as did the shadow that had orchestrated this quiet, perfect chaos. The townhouse had quieted now, save for the occasional footstep of a guard or the creak of a floorboard settling under the morning's chill. The small detective lingered in the sitting room, turning the blue silk thread between his fingers, letting it glint in the fading light. It was a trivial object at first glance, easily dismissed by anyone else, but to him it hummed with meaning. He had learned over decades that the smallest detail often held the key to the grandest deceptions. He moved to the desk, rifling carefully through letters and notes the hostess had left behind. Most were mundane social invitations, accounts, messages from bankers, but one envelope snipped from the pile as if seeking attention. Its seal was old, faded, the handwriting unmistakable, the same script that had appeared on correspondence connected to a scandal some 10 years prior, a scandal that had shaken London society quietly and was quietly forgotten. Curiosity piqued, he opened it. Inside was a brief note, a reminder of debts unpaid, favors owed, and a name long absent from polite conversation. The detective's eyes narrowed. He had recognized the signature instantly, the cousin. A memory stirred, one from a dusty file in a far corner of the Metropolitan Archives. a case where a minor theft had exposed a hidden network of gambling, deceit, and manipulation among a circle of society's elite. The cousin had been involved then, accused of facilitating a clever heist. Though never charged, the evidence swept away quietly to protect reputations. The puzzle pieces began to shift. He recalled the cousin's composure, too smooth, too confident, and the small flare of anger when the will had been discussed. This was not a crime of opportunity. It was carefully crafted, built upon knowledge and skill honed years before. The silk thread, the sugar cube, the locked room, they were all part of a design, a performance perfected over time. He returned to the guest list, cross-referencing faces with old case files. The tall gentleman with the pipe, the secretary, the young woman, they were all connected, however tangentially, to past events. Social circles intertwined, alliances and rivalries buried beneath polite conversation. One link in particular caught his attention: a charity gala, 5 years prior, where the diamond, the very same gem, had first been publicly displayed. A theft had been attempted then, foiled at the last moment, involving 2 of tonight's guests. The memory of it had faded, replaced by gossip and selective forgetting, yet the seed of desire and cunning had remained. The detective traced the thread in his mind from the past to the present. The cousin, with years of hidden skill and quiet ambition, had the knowledge of how to manipulate appearances. The secretary, ambitious yet bound by loyalty or fear, had been enlisted as a convenient instrument. The tall gentleman, carrying a grudge masked by civility, could be implicated by circumstance. And the young woman, hearing things she should not, could be made to misremember to fit the narrative designed by the mind behind it all. A knock at the door drew his attention. It was the inspector, still brimming with overconfidence from the morning's solved case. "I thought you would be pleased," the inspector said, breathless. "We have a confession from the secretary. The diamond is recovered. Case closed." The detective shook his head gently. "Recovered, perhaps, but not by whom you believe. And confession," he added, "is a convenient illusion when crafted by fear and misdirection." The inspector frowned, uncomfortable. "You mean someone else?" "Yes," said the detective. He walked toward the window and lifted the curtain slightly. Fog still clung to the square, curling like smoke. "The past has long arms. It reaches into the present when old grievances, old skills, and old opportunities converge. This crime did not emerge from today. Whodunit was nurtured in shadows a decade old." He returned to the desk, placing the blue thread carefully beside the aged envelope. The same people who shaped the events of 10 years ago now shape those of tonight. The poison, the diamond, the locked door, they are not random. They are lessons, rehearsals perfected until only a single mind could orchestrate the sequence. The inspector swallowed hard. "Then the secretary was used," the detective replied softly. "Manipulated by fear and proximity. A pawn, not the player. And the true player waits still, hidden, calculating, confident that the past has shielded them from suspicion. But the past leaves traces, sometimes in letters, sometimes in threads, sometimes in eyes that do not look away when they ought. Outside, the fog thinned enough to reveal the rooftops of London, but inside, the detective could feel the house tightening around its secret. He had uncovered a pattern, a hidden web connecting the present to a decade-old deception. The shadows of the past had been roused, and soon they would illuminate the path to the murderer. Yet for now, the criminal remained just beyond reach, watching and waiting for the perfect moment to act again. The detective knelt beside the rug, touching the faint indentation left by the fallen diamond. "Patience," he whispered. "The past and present are speaking to me, and soon the silence will answer." The detective spent the afternoon walking the rooms of the townhouse in silence, observing the subtle tensions that lingered like shadows in corners. The guests were restless, still unnerved by the events of the previous night, yet attempting to project civility. Every glance, every gesture, betrayed something: the faintest twitch, a hesitation before speech, a hand brushing too deliberately over a lapel. These were the things he observed, noting them in the small notebook he carried, though he never allowed anyone to see him write. He returned to the sitting room, now largely emptied, and placed the blue silk thread carefully on the desk beside the envelope from the past. Then, methodically, he arranged the sugar cube and teacup as they had been found. It was not for scientific analysis, not immediately, but for human observation. The door opened, and the cousin entered, bearing a calm expression that did not quite reach her eyes. She had been quiet since the morning, but now she seemed ready to speak, to reassure herself or perhaps the authorities of her innocence. "Madam," the detective said softly, rising to greet her, "may I ask you to do something for me?" She inclined her head politely, masking a faint wariness. "Sit in the chair where the hostess sat when she first retired," he instructed. "Please." She did so, noting nothing unusual, though her fingers pressed lightly into the velvet arms. He gestured to the tray, placing the teacup and sugar cube in front of her. "Now," he said gently, "please tell me, in your own words, exactly what you remember about the evening. Start from when the hostess left the dining room." The cousin's eyes flickered briefly to the sugar cube. Then she began, her voice steady at first, rehearsed almost. She described polite chatter in the corridors, the clinking of glasses, the hostess retiring, and the movements of the servants. Yet as she spoke, the detective noted a pause, almost imperceptible, when she mentioned the tray. Her hands twitched against the chair, brushing imaginary crumbs, or perhaps the thought of the cube. "Very good," he murmured. "Now, imagine you are the hostess, sitting here as the evening progresses. I will move the tray slightly to where she first reached. Think carefully where would you place your hands to lift the sugar?" Her brow furrowed. "I suppose like this," she said, mimicking the action but with a slight tremor. He leaned closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "And if someone had wished to manipulate the sugar, to place a single cube discreetly while you were distracted, how might they do it?" The cousin's composure wavered. Her eyes darted to the cube, then to his. A faint flush colored her cheeks. Her hands clenched instinctively in her lap. You mean someone could have been in the room?" she stammered. "Perhaps," he said softly. "Or perhaps not. That is why I am asking you to think like her." He paused, watching her carefully. "Notice how your memory struggles when asked to act as if you were another person. Sometimes, in such moments, we reveal more than we intend." She swallowed. Her fingers trembled slightly. I see. I did not." He raised a single finger. "Exactly. You are telling me what is convenient to say, not necessarily what is true. And the truth has a rhythm. It trembles beneath certainty. Observe your own hesitation." The detective made no accusation. He simply observed her face, noting the rapid blink, the subtle shift of weight, the micro-expression of fear that she could not fully suppress. "Thank you," he said finally. "That is enough for now." As she left, shoulders tight, the detective returned to the desk. He held the silk thread and the sugar cube in his hands, thinking. The cousin had reacted in a way no rehearsed story could hide. The tremor of her hands, the slight falter in her memory, and the instinctive glance toward the trail suggested a familiarity with the objects and the space that was not accounted for in her alibi. The inspector, entering at that moment, looked puzzled. "Did you learn anything?" "Not in the usual sense," the detective replied, "but in watching her react to the objects, to the room itself, a small truth emerged, a truth that words alone cannot conceal. Some deceptions are betrayed by instinct before the mind has a chance to correct them." He placed the thread and sugar cube side by side, contemplative. "We have been looking for evidence outside the mind. Now we begin to examine the evidence within it, and it is far more telling." Outside, London's fog had begun to lift completely, leaving a cold clarity in its wake. Inside, a subtle shift had occurred, the first genuine crack in the cousin's carefully constructed composure. The game was far from over, but the detective knew the next steps would come not from objects alone, but from the truths hidden in reaction, hesitation, and fear. The small detective returned to the sitting room later that afternoon, intent on reviewing the objects that had begun to reveal the hidden threads of the crime: the blue silk thread, the sugar cube, and the faint indentation on the rug where the diamond had rested. He had just begun arranging them in careful order, comparing positions and imagining the sequence of the evening, when a sudden commotion in the hallway drew his attention. The inspector appeared, pale and out of breath. "It's gone," he said, his voice tight. "The evidence, the sugar cube tested and secured in the lab bag, has vanished. I don't know how. No one entered the evidence room. No one had access except authorized personnel." The detective's eyes narrowed. He ran his fingers lightly over the desk where the blue silk thread still rested, the faint glint of sapphire blue taunting him. He could feel the shift immediately. Someone was actively interfering, trying to bury the truth before it could be uncovered. "Impossible," the inspector muttered. "We locked it. I personally checked the seals. Only we." He stopped abruptly, seeing the detective's calm but piercing gaze. "Impossible rarely exists outside the minds of the unobservant," the detective said quietly. "Someone is clever, patient, and unafraid of risk. They are determined to remove obstacles, to rewrite reality in their favor. And they know exactly which piece of evidence carries the most weight." The inspector swallowed. "You think the diamond thief or killer is still among us?" "Yes," the detective replied. "And they are bold enough to interfere openly, confident in the chaos they create. They do not care who observes, only that their plan proceeds uninterrupted." The detective rose and walked to the window, looking out over the fog-fading city. He considered the suspects. The cousin whose composure had faltered under psychological observation, the secretary, ensnared in a convenient alibi but with ties to the past, the tall gentleman with the pipe, whose subtle contradictions hinted at hidden knowledge, and the young woman whose nervous attentiveness suggested she had seen more than she admitted. Any one of the more, a combination could be orchestrating this new act of misdirection. He returned to the desk and examined the silk thread again, turning it slowly between his fingers. It was small, almost meaningless to an observer, yet it remained a clue too deliberate to ignore. If the sugar cube could be removed, altered, or destroyed, then the thread, and every other subtle piece of evidence, might also be manipulated. The criminal understood that controlling perception was as important as controlling the objects themselves. A soft creak behind him made him turn. The young woman stood hesitantly in the doorway, her eyes wide. I thought I might help," she said. "Perhaps there's something I saw last night." Her voice faltered, and she glanced nervously at the desk, then at the detective. "Perhaps," he murmured, studying her closely. "But help is not always genuine. Some believe they are aiding, yet they are merely swept along by fear. And others, of course, help to obscure. Tell me, what do you fear most?" The question caused her to hesitate, her hands trembling slightly. She looked down, then back up, as if measuring whether she could trust him. I fear the truth," she whispered. The detective inclined his head. "Then you understand why it is necessary for someone to remove that which exposes them." The inspector, now standing behind them, whispered, "So someone wanted the sugar cube gone. But why stop there? What else will they alter?" The detective did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked around the room, studying the rug, the tray, the positions of chairs and furniture, retracing the sequence of the night. Every object, every shadow, every step could be part of the puzzle or a deliberate distraction. "They are testing us," he said finally, turning toward the inspector, "measuring how much confusion and misdirection we will tolerate. And in that testing, they reveal themselves not by what they steal, but by how carefully they orchestrate the theft. This was not random. Whoever did this wanted us to believe the case was solved. They wanted confidence to falter. They wanted trust to crumble." The young woman stepped closer, voice barely audible. Do you think we will know who it is?" The detective held her gaze. "We will," he said softly, "but only if we remember that the simplest objects, sugar cubes, threads, footprints, can carry the heaviest truths, and only if we remain steady, even as others scramble to bury them." The room seemed heavier now, the air thick with tension. The vanished evidence had raised the stakes, revealing that the enemy was clever, present, and patient. Somewhere in the house, the criminal observed, confident that each misdirection deepened the uncertainty. But the detective, patient and deliberate, felt the first real thrill of momentum. The pieces were shifting, and now he knew that the hunt had entered its most dangerous phase. Night had fallen, and a heavy silence had settled over the townhouse, broken only by the occasional shuffle of feet or the soft murmur of guards. The detective remained in the sitting room, seated near the window, pondering the vanished sugar cube and the subtle clues that others had overlooked. Every detail from the past and present swirled together in his mind, yet despite the clarity he felt, a creeping unease had begun to take root. The criminal was bold, clever, and still at large, and it seemed they were prepared to act again. A sudden sharp knock at the door made him rise. "Come in," he said calmly, expecting one of the remaining guests. The door opened, but it was the young woman who stepped inside, her face pale and eyes wide. There's been an accident," she whispered. "The cousin, she's gone." The detective's brow furrowed. "Gone?" "She was in the library," the young woman said, trembling. "I went to speak with her. The door was locked, just like the sitting room last night. And now she's gone. The window is open, but the sill, the drops of blood." The detective moved swiftly, following her through the dimly lit corridors. Guards and servants gathered as they approached the library, drawn by the commotion. The door was indeed locked from the inside, and the window was ajar, the fog pressing against the sill. Inside, the cousin's chair lay overturned, and a dark streak of blood marked the polished floor, leading toward the window butte. The detective knelt, examining the blood with calm precision. It was real, but the trail ended abruptly at the edge of the open window. The locks were intact, no sign of forced entry. And yet, someone had escaped or been taken. The inspector arrived, panic faintly creeping into his voice. "Another locked room incident? Impossible." "Nothing is impossible," the detective said softly. "It is only cleverness that creates the illusion." He rose, brushing a hand across his coat. "The criminal has learned from the previous events. They are escalating, testing not only our patience but our ability to anticipate." He turned to the young woman. "Tell me everything you saw, again in exact order." She recounted her steps, her observations, the sound of the library door, the faint shadow across the window pane before she entered. Her hands shook, but her memory was precise. The detective listened intently, noting a subtle detail, the way her eyes flicked toward the bookshelves when she mentioned the window. Something small, easily missed, but indicative of instinctive fear rather than rehearsal. He examined the window closely. No footprints on the sill, no signs of struggle outside. And yet, the locks inside remained untouched. Whoever had acted had the skill to manipulate appearances perfectly, leaving an impossible tableau designed to baffle. A thought struck him, sharp and sudden. He returned to the rug in the sitting room, imagining the sequence of the sugar cube, the blue thread, and the vanished evidence. The pattern was becoming clear. The criminal did not merely steal or poison, they controlled perception, removing or replacing evidence to guide the investigation where they wished it to go. The cousin's disappearance was not random, it was a calculated move meant to mislead, intimidate, or eliminate a threat to the carefully constructed narrative. The detective's mind raced through the list of suspects. The cousin had been evasive under subtle psychological pressure earlier. The secretary had been too convenient, too ready to accept blame. The tall gentleman had displayed contradictions in testimony. And now the cousin was missing entirely, leaving behind only blood and the unsettling suggestion that the criminal could strike at will. The young woman, sensing the detective's tension, whispered, Do you think it's the same person?" "Yes," he said firmly, "and they are cleverer than we imagined. They know our methods, anticipate our steps. This is no ordinary crime. It is a game of anticipation and deception, and they intend to win if we do not act swiftly." He returned to the sitting room, pacing slowly, considering the blue thread in his hand. The vanished sugar cube, the missing cousin, the locked rooms, they were all parts of a single design. A trap, carefully constructed, waiting to ensnare those who believed the solution was near. "The criminal has escalated," he murmured, voice low, almost to himself. "And if we do not see the next move before it occurs, there will be another victim. Or worse." Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like a silent observer, and inside, the detective realized the investigation had changed. No longer was it simply about uncovering a past crime or recovering a diamond, it was about preventing the next impossible act. The stakes had risen sharply, and the true enemy was still several steps ahead, hidden in the shadows, orchestrating events with cold precision. He picked up the blue thread again, his mind sharpening with focus. The game had turned deadly, and now every observation, every instinct, every small clue would count. The criminal had made the first move, but the detective would not be caught unprepared. The house had grown colder as night deepened, shadows stretching long across the polished floors, yet the detective felt a new clarity amidst the tension. He returned to the sitting room, placing the blue silk thread carefully on the desk. The vanished sugar cube, the missing cousin, the locked rooms, they were not random occurrences. They were deliberate strokes in a carefully painted picture, and for the first time he began to see the outline. He sat quietly, recalling each observation from the past day. The slight twitch of the cousin's hand when discussing the sugar tray, the young woman's nervous glance toward the bookshelves, the tall gentleman's faint blush when questioned about the tobacco stains, and the secretary's quick acceptance of blame, almost eager to be removed from suspicion. Each small, seemingly inconsequential action now appeared as part of a rhythm, a subtle melody composed to mislead. Then he remembered a detail he had nearly dismissed the night before. A comment from the young woman as she first entered the investigation. "I thought I heard the door, but perhaps it was the wind." It had sounded like nervous speculation at the time, an inconsequential observation from someone overwhelmed by shock, yet now it struck him as crucial. The sound had been mentioned twice, slightly differently each time. One version implied a door moving, the other, an absent door, a shift in perception. He walked to the window, considering the fog-pressed panes. "The wind," he murmured, almost to himself, or the design of the criminal guiding attention toward distraction while the true act occurs elsewhere. Misleading sounds, misdirection, small gestures, they are the instruments of the deception. Returning to the desk, he examined the silk thread again. It had been ignored by everyone except himself, yet its color, placement, and texture now seemed deliberately chosen to draw attention subtly. Not a careless remnant, but a signal. And signals, he knew, were only meaningful when interpreted correctly. A thought struck him. He rose quickly and retraced the steps of the evening in his mind. The hostess retiring to her sitting room, the locked door, the sugar cube's placement, the guests' positions, the eventual theft of evidence. Each act was timed, rehearsed, intended to produce a predictable reaction from observers. The pattern, once obscured by the chaos of multiple motives and small lies, now appeared unmistakably clear. He picked up the blue thread and held it against the edge of the rug where the diamond had rested. The thread's position suggested a point of contact, perhaps a sleeve brushing the rug, as the hostess had moved, perhaps left intentionally to mislead. And then he noticed something else, a faint indentation in the rug parallel to the thread, previously overlooked. It was small, almost invisible, a foot, or a hand pressed lightly against the weave. The detective traced the path of that impression in his mind, connecting it with the blood streak in the library, the missing cousin, and the vanished sugar cube. The criminal had been careful, yes, but their design was consistent. Every impossible event had a subtle precursor, a signal to those with eyes to see. He remembered the secretary's tremor under questioning, the cousin's hesitation during the psychological test, and the young woman's nervous attention to minor objects. All had been orchestrated to seem random, yet they adhered to the same invisible thread, the pattern of attention the criminal wished to control. Sitting back, he murmured, "The acts themselves are distractions. The true clue lies not in what is stolen or moved, but in what the criminal cannot entirely conceal: instinct, hesitation, overcompensation." He studied the thread again, turning it between his fingers. Its subtle placement, the tiny, deliberate shift in position, the echo of past actions, it was all part of a language he had finally begun to read. He stood, eyes scanning the room, visualizing each suspect's movements, recalling every seemingly insignificant word spoken over the last 24 hours. The pattern was clear. Each act of theft, each misdirection, each manipulated witness was carefully designed to mask a central truth. And that truth, he realized, had been visible all along, hiding in the ordinary, in gestures and glances dismissed by others, in objects too small to matter. A faint smile touched his lips. "So simple, yet so cunning," he whispered. "The criminal thinks themselves invisible, yet they have written their own signature in every action. The key was here, all along, in plain sight. And now I see it." Outside, London's fog pressed lightly against the windows, but inside, the detective felt a surge of certainty. The pattern had emerged. The invisible thread had revealed its shape. And with that revelation, the next step, the decisive step toward uncovering the villain, was finally within reach. The detective sat quietly in the sitting room, the blue silk thread still resting in his hand. Hours of observation, reflection, and subtle questioning had brought him to a single conclusion. The criminal's pattern was not merely about theft, deception, or even greed. Each action, each misdirection, each meticulously constructed impossibility pointed towards something far deeper, far more personal. He summoned the remaining guests to the room, insisting they remain seated. The air was taut, heavy with anxiety, as eyes darted nervously from one face to another. He began to speak slowly, deliberately, as if drawing a picture with words rather than evidence. "You have all been observed, questioned, and tested," he said softly, "and each of you carries a motive, whether by desire, resentment, or ambition. But none of your reasons alone could explain the extraordinary measures we have seen. The locked rooms, the vanished sugar, the carefully placed evidence they were not necessary for money alone, nor for fear, nor for simple revenge." He paused, letting the weight of the statement sink in. Faces shifted, small movements betraying tension. "The true motive," he continued, "is far more personal. It is rooted not in the present, but in a long-held perception and obsession, a need to correct what the criminal sees as a flaw in the world. This crime was not merely an opportunity, it was a statement, crafted over years, rehearsed, and executed with precision to satisfy something within the mind of the culprit that others cannot understand." He gestured toward the blue thread. "Consider this. So small, so easily dismissed, yet it connects every act of the evening. The criminal left traces deliberately, not to be caught, but to orchestrate a narrative. They wished to control every reaction, every observation, every assumption. The crime was a puzzle, not merely for justice, but for themselves." A murmur ran through the room. The young woman clutched her hands nervously. The inspector straightened, sensing the gravity of the revelation. The diamond, the poison, the locked rooms, the missing cousin, each was a tool. Each was designed to test others, to measure their responses, to manipulate perception. And why? Not for money, not for inheritance, not for petty revenge. For control, for perfection, for the satisfaction of proving that no one could anticipate them, that their intellect, their cunning, would dominate every mind in this house. He turned slowly to face the cousin, who remained pale and stiff. "You see, the obsession is not with the object, nor with consequence, but with the idea of control itself. And control, when held by someone capable of such foresight, can lead to acts that others would call monstrous." The cousin's composure cracked at last, a faint tremor in the hand, a blink too long, a breath caught in the throat, tiny betrayals that confirmed the detective's insight. "You wanted to prove," he said softly, almost gently, "that the world bends to your will, that no one could outthink you, and to do so you were willing to risk death, deceit, and chaos, not to gain anything tangible, but to satisfy the hunger of the mind itself." A gasp echoed through the room. The young woman whispered, I never imagined." The detective nodded. Few could. Obsession disguised as reason is the most dangerous motive of all. It is patient, meticulous, and terrifyingly logical. The criminal's mind does not rush. It calculates, it manipulates, it layers reality and fiction until the two are indistinguishable. The crimes of tonight are the visible expression of that invisible force. The cousin's eyes darted to the thread on the desk, then to the empty space where the diamond had once rested. Every carefully orchestrated detail of the evening now bore their signature. They had wanted recognition not from society, not from wealth, but from intellect alone. The thrill was in the challenge, the satisfaction in the orchestration, the knowledge that they could move the world like a chessboard and no one would see the hand. The detective's voice softened, but carried the weight of certainty. "The motive is clear, and with clarity comes the opportunity to act. For control is never complete while observers remain awake, while minds remain alert. And the mind that seeks to dominate cannot endure being understood." A tense silence filled the room. The criminal, finally exposed not by money, greed, or revenge, but by the very compulsions that had driven every act, realized that the intricate design they had believed flawless had been read, step by step, by the patient eye. And the game, which had seemed theirs alone to command, was now poised on the precipice of conclusion. The detective placed the thread carefully back on the desk and looked around the room. "The motives are revealed, the methods understood. And now," he said quietly, "we must see if the criminal's control can be undone before another act demands it." The house was silent now, the earlier tension thick in the air, as if the walls themselves held their breath. The detective moved with calm precision, arranging the room exactly as it had been the night of the crime, the subtle details painstakingly restored. The chairs in their precise angles, the teacup and tray returned to their original positions, the faint indentation in the rug carefully revealed beneath the edge of the carpet. Every object, every shadow, every placement was part of a larger design, his design, constructed to draw the criminal from hiding and force a reaction no deception could mask. He instructed the inspector to remain nearby, though out of sight, and summoned the cousin to the room. The moment she stepped inside, her eyes immediately swept the familiar layout, and the first flicker of recognition betrayed her. The detective observed in silence, noting the way her breath hitched ever so slightly, the brief clench of her fists, the micro-tremor of her hands, a language of instinct no rehearsal could suppress. "You have been patient," he said softly, almost conversationally, "and clever. But patience and cleverness cannot erase the truth of a pattern, nor the instinct that exposes it." The cousin's composure wavered. I do not understand," she said, though her eyes betrayed rising panic. "You see," he continued, stepping closer, "each act, each manipulation, each disappearance was part of a design. The sugar cube, the locked rooms, the vanished evidence, the careful misdirection of witnesses, all of it followed a rhythm only you could have composed. And yet, even the most meticulous rhythm falters when observed with the proper attention." Her lips pressed together tightly, and she looked toward the window, as if plotting a last escape, though she had nowhere to go. The detective noticed a subtle twitch of her shoulder, the faint tightening of her jaw, a movement he recognized from countless past confrontations. The moment before a criminal realizes that the net is closing. "Why?" she whispered at last, voice trembling but controlled. "Why must you always see?" "Because truth," he said softly, "cannot be hidden by brilliance alone. It leaves traces, subtle and persistent, for those who know where and who to look." The detective stepped back and gestured toward the desk. "Observe the thread, the indentation in the rug, the positions of the chairs. Every detail overlooked by others now bears witness. Every action of yours, every attempt to manipulate reality, has left a signature visible only to the patient eye." The cousin's gaze fell on the blue silk thread. Her hands shook. "It was never meant to be discovered," she whispered. "No," the detective replied, his voice calm, almost gentle. "It was meant to challenge the mind, to control perception, to prove a point. But a point cannot stand against reason when reason is applied patiently and without fear." A sudden movement startled the room. The cousin reached toward the window in desperation, seeking the familiar escape route. The detective anticipated her, stepping swiftly yet without haste, cutting off her path. The tension was electric, every second stretched taut. "You see," he said quietly, "even now, instinct betrays you. You cannot maintain control. The pattern is known, the motive understood, the steps traced. There is no escape." Tears welled in her eyes, a mixture of frustration, fear, and reluctant admiration. I wanted to prove it," she whispered. "To show that no one could outthink me, that I could orchestrate everything perfectly." "And you nearly did," the detective said, voice measured. "But perfection is an illusion, and brilliance, when applied to wrongdoing, cannot outrun observation." She sank into a chair, trembling, defeated. The detective's gaze swept the room, calm and unwavering. Every action she had taken, every deception, had been anticipated. The vanished sugar cube, the poisoned tray, the carefully manipulated witnesses, the locked rooms, all had led here. The inspector stepped forward to secure her, but the detective raised a hand. "Wait," he said. "Observe her reaction. Every detail has meaning, and this confession, even unspoken, is the final piece." The cousin's shoulders slumped. Her hands lay open on her lap. For the first time, she was without pretense, without artifice, and the detective read every nuance, guilt, obsession, and the strange pride of a mind that had believed itself untouchable finally acknowledged defeat. The room exhaled in silence. The game was over. The diamond's theft, the poison, the chaos of vanished evidence and locked doors, all were understood, accounted for, and exposed. The criminal had been patient, clever, and relentless, but the detective had been patient too. Every step of the orchestration had led him here, to the final confrontation, and the truth, in all its shocking clarity, was finally laid bare. He looked at her one last time, calm and resolute. "The mind that seeks to dominate may plot in shadows," he said softly. "But even the most intricate shadow cannot escape the light of reason." The room seemed to exhale in relief. The cousin, finally subdued, sat slumped in the chair, the tension that had gripped the house for days slowly easing. The inspector moved forward to secure her, while the other guests watched with a mixture of awe and fear. The small detective straightened, allowing a faint smile to touch his lips. For a moment, it seemed the game was over, and then a faint sound, a soft click, almost imperceptible, echoed from the far corner of the room. The detective's eyes narrowed immediately. Every muscle in his small frame tensed, his attention snapping to the bookshelf lining the wall. The sound was faint, mechanical, yet deliberate. The young woman gasped. What was that?" The detective remained calm, stepping slowly toward the source. "Listen carefully," he murmured, crouching near the shelf. His fingers traced the spines of the books, noting one that protruded slightly farther than the others. It was subtle, something anyone else would have passed over. But he paused, pressed, and a faint spring released. A hidden compartment clicked open, revealing a small velvet pouch. He picked it up and opened it, revealing the diamond itself, glittering faintly in the dim light. His eyes swept the room, catching the expressions of every guest. Shock, confusion, and sudden recognition flickered across faces. The inspector stepped closer, brow furrowed. "But the cousin," she confessed. "She orchestrated everything, didn't she?" The detective shook his head slowly. "She was the visible player, yes. The one whose pattern of obsession and manipulation dominated the evening, but she was not the final architect. Look here." He held up the velvet pouch, then allowed his gaze to linger on a figure standing slightly apart, a faintly triumphant expression hidden behind polite composure. It was the tall gentleman with the pipe, who had seemed so cooperative, so composed during questioning. A small smirk curved his lips as he realized the detective had noticed him. "The diamond," the detective said softly, "was never truly in her control. She manipulated events, created misdirection, and tested our observation, but she did not have the final word. That belongs to someone else entirely." The gentleman's eyes flickered, and he took a subtle step back. "I don't understand," he stammered. "Everything I did was in good faith. Surely it was her." "Everything is never as it seems," the detective replied, voice measured. "Observe the evidence. The vanished sugar cube, the locked rooms, the poisoned trail, carefully orchestrated misdirections. The cousin executed them perfectly because she believed it was her design. But every action played into a larger scheme, one that only you, sir, could have orchestrated. The hidden compartment, the final concealment of the diamond, it required knowledge of the house's secret mechanisms and a patience that exceeded even hers." He stepped closer, eyes unwavering. "You allowed the cousin to take center stage, to provide the chaos, while you remained hidden in plain sight. You studied reactions, manipulated perception, and ensured the ultimate prize remained unseen until the right moment." The gentleman's hand twitched toward the pocket of his coat. "You're impossible, Impossible exists only for those unwilling to observe," the detective said calmly. "You assumed your careful manipulation of events would remain invisible, but patterns, no matter how subtle, reveal themselves to the patient eye. Your final flourish, the hiding of the diamond, betrayed your authorship more than any confession could. You relied on others to create the narrative, yet you left the most important detail exposed." A tense silence gripped the room. The cousin, previously the villain of the evening, now sat pale and trembling, suddenly realizing she had been a tool in a greater design. The inspector's jaw tightened as comprehension dawned. The detective knelt to replace the diamond in the pouch, his mind already tracing the sequence of events in precise order. "Tonight's lesson," he said softly, voice carrying to every corner, "is that genius often hides in plain sight. The mind that creates misdirection may delight in chaos, but it cannot conceal itself entirely from careful observation." The tall gentleman finally moved, stepping back as if defeated by the inevitability of exposure. You can't prove proof," the detective said quietly. "Lies not only in confession, but in the sequence of actions, the hidden patterns, the subtle signals that reveal the hand behind the mask. And in this case, the mask has fallen." The room remained frozen for a heartbeat, then slowly exhaled, the tension shifting from fear to astonishment. The final twist had emerged. The visible villain was not the true mastermind, and the game, which had seemed so neatly concluded, had only just reached its final revelation. The detective, calm and deliberate, placed the velvet pouch on the desk. His eyes swept the room, noting every expression, every tremor, every instinctive reaction. "The diamond is recovered," he said, the orchestrator exposed. "And now," he added with quiet certainty, "justice may finally follow its rightful course." The fog pressed lightly against the windows outside, but inside, the truth shone clear, intricate, and undeniable, a tapestry woven with patience, observation, and the subtle hand of a mind that had anticipated every move, every misdirection, every twist, until the final secret had been revealed. The room was heavy with silence, the tension lingering even after the diamond had been revealed and the true mastermind exposed. The cousin sat quietly, pale and trembling, finally understanding that her intricate manipulation had been just one layer in a far more elaborate design. The tall gentleman with the pipe, now fully unmasked as the architect behind the chaos, stood rigid, calculating a last desperate move, even as the detective's calm gaze held him firmly in place. The inspector stepped forward, hand on his notebook, ready to record the confession, to secure the criminal and bring the ordeal to a close. Yet the detective raised a hand gently, his eyes never leaving the mastermind's. "Wait," he said, voice measured. "There is more to consider before we act. Not every truth is obvious, and not every action has been observed by those who think themselves vigilant." The gentleman's hands twitched slightly at his sides, a subtle sign that the net had tightened. "What are you suggesting?" he asked, his voice low, almost controlled. "I am suggesting," said the detective, "that what you orchestrated was not merely theft, misdirection, or obsession. It was a demonstration of perception and intellect. And in creating this complex web, you left subtle clues, ones that were observed but misunderstood. You trusted others to be deceived entirely, yet you underestimated the patience and attention of one who does not overlook the smallest detail." He gestured to the blue silk thread on the desk. "This thread, dismissed as trivial, was deliberately placed to mark your path. The indentation in the rug, invisible to all but the attentive, traces the steps of your intervention. The vanished sugar cube was meant to mislead and create an illusion of simplicity, but it betrayed your knowledge of timing, your awareness of human reaction." The inspector looked from the thread to the indentation, beginning to understand the detective's reasoning. "So every detail, however small, was part of a signature?" he asked. "Exactly," said the detective. "And the pattern was consistent. The cousin was a performer. The visible chaos you orchestrated. But the underlying design, the manipulation of perception, the precise concealment of the diamond, the testing of patience and observation revealed the mind behind the curtain. It was brilliant, audacious, and almost flawless. The mastermind's expression flickered, a brief acknowledgement of defeat. Yet there was no panic, no surrender in his posture, only the quiet awareness of a mind still calculating, still considering escape. The detective's gaze remained unwavering. "And yet," the detective continued softly, "despite the clarity we have achieved, the ultimate control was never yours. For the patient observer can anticipate the bravest deception. Every act, every minor slip, every instinctive reaction you thought unnoticed has been catalogued, understood, and accounted for." The tall gentleman exhaled slowly, shoulders relaxing fractionally, as if conceding a point he could not fully argue. "So, I am caught?" he asked, not entirely pleading, but more in quiet admiration. "Caught," the detective said, "in the understanding that your brilliance could be read, your patterns discerned, your motive revealed. Justice, however, is measured not only in confinement but in awareness. And tonight, awareness is absolute." The inspector moved forward, ready to act, and yet the detective held him back one last time. "Notice," he said, gesturing to the subtle clues scattered throughout the room, "how the simplest things were overlooked. A thread, a slight indentation, hesitation in speech, these are the signs of truth. The mind that creates deception leaves traces always, and only the patient, observant, and persistent can follow them to their source." The cousin's gaze shifted between the detective and the mastermind, a mix of fear and reluctant respect. The diamond glinted on the desk, recovered, but it seemed almost secondary to the intricate mental tapestry that had been unraveled before their eyes. Yet even as the inspector moved to secure the villain, the detective allowed a small, knowing glance. The tall gentleman had been cornered, but he had remained composed, his mind still quietly calculating. Though justice would be served tonight, the detective sensed the possibility that such a mind might find another way, in another place, another time. The room exhaled as the inspector took the criminal into custody. The detective remained standing, hands folded, eyes sweeping the space one last time. "The case is concluded," he said softly. "But remember this, in every act, every omission, every hesitation, there lies the truth. It is patient, precise, and ever-present. And those who watch, observe, and think carefully will always be one step ahead." Outside, the fog had lifted completely, revealing the calm clarity of London under a pale moon. Inside, the townhouse was quiet once more, yet an unsettling sense lingered, a reminder that brilliance can conceal danger, that a mind untamed may vanish and return, and that the world of observation and reason is never truly at rest. Justice had been delivered tonight, yes, but the memory of the criminal's genius and the subtle lessons left behind would remain long after the diamond was returned and the case closed. The house had grown quiet at last. Guards and servants moved softly through the corridors, securing rooms and cataloguing the final pieces of evidence. The guests had retired to their chambers, shaken but relieved, leaving the detective alone in the sitting room with the diamond now safely in its pouch and the faintest traces of chaos lingering in the corners. The fog outside pressed against the windows, silvered by the glow of street lamps, and the air carried that peculiar hush of a city momentarily at peace. The detective stood by the desk, eyes sweeping over the scene one last time. He noted the faint indentation in the rug, the subtle dust disturbed near the bookshelf, and the blue silk thread carefully preserved as a relic of the evening's revelations. Each item spoke to the patient observer, each small imperfection a whisper of human error and design. Yet, as he examined the room, a small, almost imperceptible anomaly caught his attention: a shadow, a mark, a scuff on the floor that did not align with the known sequence of movements. He knelt, studying it carefully. A breathless thought struck him. It was minor, almost dismissible, yet it hinted at something that had not been fully accounted for. A brief glance toward the bookshelf revealed a slight shift in one of the books, too subtle to have drawn notice before. The detective's eyes narrowed. The diamond had been recovered, the mastermind had been apprehended, the cousin's role was understood. And yet, some trace remained unclaimed, some secret still lingering in the shadows. A faint smile touched his lips. He straightened, hands clasped behind his back, and allowed himself the briefest moment of satisfaction. The case was, for all practical purposes, resolved. The lives of the household would proceed once more, the diamond returned to its rightful place, and the immediate danger lifted. And yet he could not shake the sense that the last detail, the smallest, most unassuming trace, was a whisper of unfinished business, a reminder that the threads of human behavior are seldom fully untangled. He stepped to the window, gazing out at the fog lifting over London. The street lamps flickered in the evening mist, casting elongated shadows that danced and wavered, much like the minds of those he had observed throughout the investigation. Even in apparent stillness, the world was rarely as it seemed, and the detective felt the familiar thrill of anticipation, that quiet certainty that another puzzle awaited just beyond sight, waiting for those perceptive enough to recognize it. A soft footstep drew his attention. The young woman lingered at the doorway, her face still pale, yet calmer than before. "Detective," she whispered, hesitant, "do you think it's really over?" He turned slowly, calm and composed. "For now," he said, voice measured, "the danger is past, and the immediate mysteries are resolved. But one must always remember where humans act, patterns exist. Where patterns exist, questions remain. And where questions remain, so does the possibility of discovery." Her eyes widened slightly, absorbing the meaning behind his words. He smiled faintly, the smallest twitch of humor touching his lips. "You may rest easy tonight. The diamond is safe, the culprit accounted for. And yet," he added, gazing once more at the faint scuff on the floor, "the mind is a curious thing. It leaves traces long after the main events have passed. Sometimes, the smallest marks hold the key to a future mystery." With that, he turned and walked slowly toward the door, staff in hand, the sound of his steps soft against the polished floor. The fog outside swirled faintly, as if alive, carrying the weight of the night's events and the promise of secrets yet to be uncovered. The detective paused at the threshold, casting one final glance back at the sitting room where every object, every shadow, and every imperfection remained silent witnesses to the intricate play of human cunning and error. As he stepped into the corridor, leaving the household to its uneasy peace, he knew the story was far from complete. Somewhere, just beyond the next turn, the faintest clue awaited him, a puzzle yet unsolved, a mind yet to reveal its design. The case of the vanished diamond had ended, yes, but the game subtle, intricate, and never-ending would continue, and the detective, ever patient, ever observant, would be ready. The fog drifted along the streets of London, and in its quiet, mysterious swirl, the faintest hint of another challenge lingered. A mystery never ends, it only waits for the keen eye that will uncover it. And the detective, with his unmatched attention to detail, already knew that the next puzzle was only a step away.